So, welcome everybody. This is like an extraordinary user experience group because we've got to have core people in the group, and then we've extended to some more friends and co-workers in the area. So, my name is Sarah Sherman, for those of you who don't know me, and this is my colleague Naomi Bain. And we coordinate the user experience group, and I'll tell you a bit about what that is. But today's focus is on the accessibility regulations specifically for websites, so that's why we're all here today. So this is what's going to happen this morning. We've got a couple of hours to flesh this out. We'll do some introductions. I'll say a little bit more about me and Naomi and what this group is all about. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Fiona, who's going to set the scene in terms of a bit about what these regulations are all about and what the expectations are on us. Then we're going to find out what people are actually up to at the moment. So Danielle has very kindly offered to talk about the work that she's been leading on at King's. And then hopefully Marcus will be beaming in from Nottingham Trent. But if not, it doesn't matter because I'm interested to know what all of you are doing as well. And then we'll have a discussion about what we should be doing if we're not doing anything yet and what this all means to us. So, as I said, I am Sarah. I work for the Bloomsbury Learning Environment, which is a shared digital education service for 6 of the University of London partners, so all of you are represented today. But this group extends beyond Bloomsbury, so we partner with the University of London, so member institutions also part of this group. Naomi, do you want to say something about yourself?
Yeah, I work in the IT department at Birkbeck, and most of my job is to do with usability testing and that sort of thing. And I help Sarah coordinate this group.
Okay, that was good timing. So we set this group up, actually Naomi and I didn't set this group up, the University of London worldwide set this up probably about 3 or 4 years ago now to really explore user experience across constituent areas. So I got involved as the learning technology side, but a lot of you work for web, as Naomi does, library, we've got some librarians, so there's a whole mixture of stakeholders who will use and apply user experience philosophies and approaches to their work, and the point of the group is to share that practice, to maybe look at some joint projects, if there's such a thing, and see how we can support each other. So I would be quite interested to know who you are, so could you raise your hand if you, let's see how quickly we can do this, if you work for Birkbeck? That was really good timing. LSHTM, Goldsmiths, UCL, City University, no one's here from City, Royal Veterinary College, LSE, King's, SOAS, University of London itself, and well, that includes worldwide. Yep, there they are. Who have I missed out? Royal Holloway. Courtauld Institute. Anyone else? Okay, so we've got a good coverage of University of London institutions. How about if you work in the area of digital education, learning technology, TEL, put your hand up. Okay, what about content, web editing, website management stuff? Comms and marketing, library. Elizabeth's not here yet, but Lucy was a bit library. IT. Have I missed anything out?
I'm an administrator.
Administrative support. Academic. Okay, excellent. So again, we've got a range of universities, but we're all kind of brethren under the University of London and some constituent areas. Okay, does that help? You get an idea of who we all are. So a little bit more about this user group. We have some terms of reference which we kind of we work on every year to make it more accessible. So there's a really nice definition of what UX actually is now, courtesy of Naomi. So if you want to know more about this group, that's our terms of reference. And if you would like to join the group, you'd be very welcome. So just drop myself or Naomi an email, say I want to be in. We meet once a term. The last couple of years we put on a conference. We did one, I think, not this academic year, but the last 2 academic years. to really focus on that and to bring in other colleagues from across the membership organisation. So give me a shout if you'd like to join the group. But as I said, today we focus on the accessibility regulations, and that came out of our last meeting. Tim, there's space at the front if you want to squeeze through. Just past Diana.
Sorry.
It should be a seat already. So at the last group meeting, we talked about what topics might be a nice discussion point for the following meeting, and unanimously this was the decision we came to. So I'm going to hand over to Fiona, if that's all right, who's going to put this all into context. So shall I find your slides for you? There we go.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm Fiona Strawbridge, I'm the Head of Digital Education at UCL. We're in the IT department. And this time last year I knew very little about accessibility, and actually I wasn't even aware of the regulations until after they had been published. But I think it was the Policy Connect document about accessible BLEs and websites that kind of alerted me and alarmed me and made me realise that actually this is something I needed to take action on. And I found myself, because of kind of contacts at JISC and in UCISA, found myself working a little bit with colleagues in other parts of the sector to try and understand the regulations and their implications. Now, this presentation is one that I presented a couple of weeks ago to the Heads of E-Learning Forum, which is a group of people in roles like mine. And we were thinking about really what the sector needs from government, from JISC, from UCISA to try and respond, because I have a feeling that we're all sort of independently panicking and feeling in need of a bit of guidance and actually a bit of sort of legal advice on how to interpret these regulations. And so what I know from what I can see, awareness of this is really quite patchy. Now, actually, I'm really impressed that there are so many people and so many institutions represented here, and you do all know that this is here. But I'm not completely convinced that the senior people in institutions across the sector do understand that this is something that they need to do something about. There's a great emailing list, Digital Accessibility Regulations at JISC-Mail. If you're not already subscribed to it, I recommend you do. There are questions and answers there, but also some very good suggestions and sharing of good practice, sharing of resources. But certainly, looking back through the archives of that, there's been quite a lot of evidence of people thinking, oh my goodness, what are we meant to do? I don't understand, you know, what do I need to do? Who do I need to tell about this? And there are briefings and conferences like this. I seem to be going to one a week at the moment. And, you know, I think these are much needed for us to share our confusion and also our insights. There is clarity needed on the scope of regulations, on the timescales, on actually what some of the words in regulations mean. So if you read the legal document, it talks about things suddenly coming into scope if they have been substantially revised. Now, nobody will give a straight answer on what substantial revision means. And there is also a kind of get-out clause, a disproportionate burden, if you can argue that a response to the regulations would involve a disproportionate amount of work for your institution, then you might want to try that. But what does that actually mean? Some of the exemptions, I think, are a little bit woolly. And exactly how is this going to be monitored and enforced? And one of the big problems is that when the legislation was first published, there were some errors in it. And there's a link in circulation which is actually to the original version of the legislation, which has now been superseded by an update. But for some reason, it's still on the Parliament website. The old one is still there, as well as the new one. So there is a link in this slide to the correct version. And I would recommend that if you're actually wanting to read the chapter and verse, you do go to the correct link. Sarah's got these slides and can share them, so you can follow the link. There are some key stakeholders in this, trying to sort of help us to interpret the legislation. The first one that I was aware of was Policy Connect, and their role is to provide guidance on the meaning of the regulations, and they were the people who produced the accessible VLEs document, which I'm afraid certainly misled me, and I think it may have misled other institutions to think that actually all that was in scope of this was the VLE, the website and library platforms, because those are the things that were mentioned there. But in fact, this legislation applies to every online platform that your institution runs, whether it's the HR system, finance system, student information, room bookings. If it's online, and if people need to use it as part of their job or their study, or the public have access to it, then it's in scope. So that was something which really only dawned on me some time into looking at this stuff. Government digital services, so they are the arm of gov.uk, which have been charged with providing guidance. Now, these regulations, the actual title of the regulations is Public Sector Digital Accessibility Regulations. And so I think, and they've come from an EU directive, but I think that the GDS, the Government Digital Services, didn't really appreciate the university context. Most government and public sector websites are pretty well controlled, centrally controlled. You've got your web editors, and you've got the people creating content, and they have very strict sort of rules and regs about who can do what. And universities are rather different. I don't know about your universities, but we have, of course, our main institutional website, but we've got hundreds of other websites belonging to research teams and to different departments, and it's the Wild West, frankly, and actually they're all in scope, and I'm not convinced that the people who run those bits of the web have a clue that this is happening. And of course, even more of a Wild West is the academic content in the VLE. And so, whereas in the public sector, you've probably got a limited number of people responsible for ensuring that their online services are accessible, in a university, you've got a lot of people, and you've got a lot of academics who, they simply shove stuff up there without caring too much about whether it's accessible or not. And so there's a huge job, I think, for universities to try and re-educate their academic community. And I don't know about you guys, I'm getting a certain amount of pushback on this when I talk to academic departments. I had an apologetic email last night from somebody because I'd been to their education committee and I'd had to stand up to some fairly robust questioning. And the guy said, he had to apologise that his colleagues hadn't really been trained to be polite to visitors. Anyway, so I think the government digital services is going somewhere. Also, when I met with government digital services, and I asked them, can you explain what substantial revision means? And can you explain what disproportionate burden means? And can you explain whether we really do have to provide captions and transcripts for every single lecture capture that we do? They said, no, we can't give you that level of guidance. You need to consult your lawyers. So, potentially every institution's got to go and consult their lawyers, and lawyers don't come cheap. So, and then JISC. Now, I think JISC have been very good on this. They're working behind the scenes to try and get a bit more clarity from government digital services. I don't know if you know Alistair McNaught. If you don't, follow him on Twitter, and you'll see he contributes a lot on the digital accessibility legislation JISC mail list. He's an absolute accessibility champion, guru, super wise chap. He's now left JISC, which is terrible for JISC, but it's actually quite good for us still because he is available as a consultant to do independent work. I suspect he's been pulled in multiple directions now. But the trouble is that he's departed from JISC. JISC do run monthly online clinics. So the first Wednesday of the month, which was yesterday, they ran a clinic. It's an online webinar, and part of it will have a sort of formal presentation of some aspect of this legislation, and then the rest of it is an open kind of question and answer thing. So that's really useful. And there is also a working group for HEADorg, so Further and Higher Education Digital Accessibility Working Group. And that is it's a kind of coalition of volunteers who are trying to understand, interpret, make sense, and provide a sort of focus of support for the sector in how to respond to this. So the people who are involved in that, I seem to have found myself on that group now. There's a guy called Ben, or two people from Kent, Ben Watson and George Rose. Ben is in Kent University and he's their digital accessibility lead. George works for Kent County Council, so he's on the public sector side trying to respond to legislation. There is somebody from Policy Connect, there's somebody from JISC, there's somebody from GDS, and now there's me from UCISA, and also the new Chief Executive Officer of UCISA has joined in on this because I think she recognised that this is a really important thing and that the sector needs support. So that's good to know that that's there. This working group, and in the slide I've got up at the moment, there's a link to their terms of references, but basically they are trying to help us to create model accessibility statements, because I guess you're probably aware that one of the things you have to do if you run a website or if you run an online service is have an accessibility statement for that service, explaining what you've done to ensure that it's fully accessible, any areas where you know it's currently deficient, and then what you're going to do to address those, and what people can do if it's not working for them, who they can flag up problems to. So we need to produce these accessibility statements, and so FHEDORG is looking at that. And of course, the Government Digital Service have also created some model statements, and Ben and George from Kent have got one that is being used at the University of Kent. The FHEDORG is also developing guidance, providing examples of good practice, and is trying to liaise with government and with the regulators to ensure that we get proper, decent guidance. I met with GDS, with Alistair and Ben to try and kind of get a bit more clarity. So the questions that we were asking them was about, what is substantial revision? And as I've already mentioned, they told us it's, the regulations don't define this, so it's up to the higher education institution to determine, and they recommended that the working group provide some guidance. And I spoke to our institutional lawyers yesterday about that, and they said, actually, they didn't feel confident in providing guidance either, and that we'd need to consult a legal specialist in the area of disability and sort of inclusivity. We were asking them about, do we really have to fix every single document that's in the BLE? Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of documents. If we know that, for instance, that we don't have any visually impaired students on a programme, then is it a good use of academics' time to be doing image descriptions for every image? That kind of question. And what they said then was, actually, we just need to be really clear. If that's the approach we're taking, we need to be clear about that in our accessibility statements. But again, we do need to consult with the lawyers, because this is one of the areas that I'm getting a lot of pushback from academics. They're saying, you must be kidding, I'm not spending my summer going through all of my slides. Third-party content, if an institution has paid for it or has commissioned it, even if you didn't pay, if you asked for it to be produced for you, then that's in scope as well. I was wondering whether lecture capture would help as an additional format. So if you are currently providing your slides to your students after a lecture, if it's been captured, then you've got the audio soundtrack. Does that help to get, in terms of providing an additional format? And again, they said, well, you need to go and decide what you think and come up with some guidance. We were wanting to understand what platforms are really in scope, and the bad news is it's kind of everything. So I think your IT directors need to understand this. And I'm working with UCISA to do a briefing for directors to open their eyes to the scale of this challenge. In terms of disproportionate burden, the guidance that we got on that was that you may be able to argue in the first year, because of the scale of the task, that it would be a disproportionate burden to fix everything. But with time, we've really got to get there. There's really no excuse for not. And certainly, when you're working with academics, I mean, of course, I come from an e-learning background, so my concern is trying to get them to respond. And they could probably reasonably argue that they can't spend the entire summer sorting out every single lecture slide. But if you're creating new content, then let's build in accessibility from the outset. Because honestly, it makes it more accessible to everybody if you do it properly. What the GDS did do for us is they clarified timescales, which are really quite hard to get your head around in the legislation. So, for public-facing websites, new or updated content, your deadline is the 23rd of September, or rather the 22nd of September this year. So if you're in that web world, you've got a really tight deadline. Sorry about that. Existing sites which haven't been updated, then you've got an extra year. But my understanding is that if you've done some kind of system-wide update, then everything then has to comply, everything within it. And it's not just the web page bit, it's documents which are on the website as well. For things which are behind a password, then the timescales are more murky. If you do any work on your teaching content this summer, then actually it doesn't have to comply with the legislation. If you do any work on it, if you substantially revise it or upload new stuff after the 23rd of September, then it does need to comply. So it's a kind of weird one, and I suppose there's a sort of a way for the academic community to do their teaching notes updates this summer without worrying about accessibility, and then they kind of got away with it, which is unfortunate. You know, I think what we're encouraging people to do is to ensure that they at least meet our e-learning baseline, which talks about the structure of information in the BLE and the presentation of information and clear labelling of links and so on, and to then start to worry about the content of the PowerPoints and their Word documents as the next stage. So it's only when content, if it's behind a password, it's only when it's first substantially revised after 23rd September that it's in scope. And I didn't really appreciate this until the meeting with the GDS. What do we all need to do? Well, what we could do, usefully, I think, is to share our ideas, examples of how we're responding, examples of training materials, workshop outlines, online materials. We need to understand the legislation, and that isn't a trivial task. You probably need, or somebody, your IT director, needs to identify what platforms are in scope. We've got a project at UCL to do that, and the project manager has got a great big long list of all the things that might be in scope, and she's going to have to kind of come up with the list of the applications which are definitely in scope, and then identify which ones have been updated in the last year, and make sure then that we do an accessibility test of those, which requires some specialist skills. So, you know, we have a couple of assistive technology staff, and they're really busy testing sites. Accessibility statements have got to be written for each platform. Now, I'm absolutely sure we're not going to have an accessibility statement ready for every platform at UCL for September 2019. We'll have some, but we haven't got any at the moment. We haven't managed to produce one yet, even for the VLE or for the website that we're in a position to share. And we know we probably are going to have policies on teaching content so we can tell academics actually what they have to do. And there may be a training policy that you have to do a certain amount of training if you're going to be put in charge of a website, for instance. There may need to be takedown policies for the material that's flagged up as being inaccessible. And locally in institutions, you're going to have to prioritise the remediation work. You're not going to be able to fix everything at once. So I guess certainly the externally facing sites are massively high priority. and particularly if there's just sort of open web pages. You probably need a communications plan. We haven't really had a very systematic plan for comms at UCL. I sent out a message to our faculty tutors just before Easter, which raised levels of panic, which is really unfortunate, and I now really regret the tone of my comms. So I've kind of now bottled it somewhat, and but you know, you do need to think about how to do that. We've got a comms team who are now helping with that, and I'm handing it over to them because they know how to frame the message. We've had to do quite a lot of work on our training and guidance that we provide. So Caroline here runs our digital skills development team, and she has been grafting really hard to provide better online guidance and training sessions and drop-in for staff to come to. The business of fixing stuff, well, in some cases that will be quite easy. In other cases, you'll be going to the supplier of your platform and saying, come on, sort it out. In other cases, there may need to be an expensive project to make some of our platforms successful. I gather we did some testing of Turnitin recently, and apparently it's a bit of a disaster. So hopefully the forthcoming Turnitin sort of update will help, but I don't know enough detail about that. Don't ask me questions about that, I can't answer them. And you need to establish a central point of contact so that people can flag up problems, but also that people can ask you questions about this. We've got that. We've got at the moment we've just got a sort of mailbox, which I now regret because I'm dealing with those messages on top of my daily tsunami of emails. But you will need to think about that kind of thing. I mentioned accessibility statements, so the Kent ones I think are quite good. They've got a technical statement, they've got a plain English statement, which is probably what most end users would access, and then they've got the known issues bit. So you might want to take a look at those, and Sarah will share the presentation with the links. Alistair McNaught, who I mentioned, one of my favourite people, he wrote a really good blog post on the challenges of having responsibility for doing this stuff without any authority, and I sort of feel quite a lot. I think in a lot of institutions, it's somebody in the middle, like me, who's actually trying to lead on it because there's nobody upstairs saying it's got to happen. And so it's quite a thought-provoking one, and I've already forwarded it to our directors. I haven't had a reply to it, but you know, you might want to take a read of that. So that's on the JISC accessibility blog. What I have done, though, is I've persuaded the dean who led on our GDPR response to chair a task and finish group. And so that includes people from HR, from Qualities and Diversity, from the Student Union, academics, organisational development, and e-learning folk, and probably more than I'm not remembering right at the moment, to own and carry out the institutional action plan on all of that. UCISA, thankfully, with the new CEO, Deborah Green, she's really, really new. I mean, I think she only started about 5 weeks ago or something. But she's committed to prioritising this as part of UCISA's activities. So one of the things we're going to be doing is raising awareness amongst IT directors. Drafted an article to go to them next week. We may be putting on a one-day conference for directors in September, bringing in people from JISC and GDS and Policy Connect, and possibly legal. I think she was a solicitor and she's got good contacts in the law world, and so she might be able to draw on that. BDorg, and particularly Ben and George, they've got an outline for a digital accessibility toolkit, which UCISA will help to produce and hopefully deliver nice and quickly. We're looking at whether we can actually commission some legal advice that would be usable by the rest of the sector. Now, I broached this with our lawyers yesterday, and what they said was, for UCL to be able to use it, we'd have to be one of the groups of people who commissioned it and instructed, you know, sent the briefing. But I'm talking to JISC Legal about this as well. So we'll look at the possibilities, but it may be that if institutions want to make use of and share the cost of legal advice, that you can join up, pay a little bit of money, contribute towards the cost of the lawyers to get some legal advice to get you started. No one's going to stop you or your institution spending money independently on legal advice, but you might want to share the cost. And we'll continue to lobby GDS and Policy Connect. I think one of the things that UCISA can do as a sort of IT organisation is to lobby suppliers to ensure that their platforms are more accessible. I know that individual institutions are doing that, but it'd be quite good to have a bit of kind of welly behind it. And potentially we'll look at whether we can procure some training, some sector-focused training and guidance. So, and yes, I missed the webinar, the GIST webinar yesterday, but I've seen that some of the guidance that the FEED.org working group have produced on timescales on interpreting the legislation and on something else that I can't remember, is on this website. All I've done is had a quick look at it this morning, but it's being temporarily hosted in a place called LexDis, which I think is based at the University of Southampton. So you might want to take a look at that link, because that has a nice clear explanation of sort of what the legislation all means. But it's been an interesting few months. I mean, I think from a standing start for me in terms of understanding accessibility issues, I'm now spending 2/3 of my time working on this, and probably 3/4 of it thinking about this or fretting about it, including out of hours. So, yeah.
Wow. Fiona, thank you. I think there's probably going to be lots of questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off.
Yeah.
Have you taken it upon yourself to be the lead at UCL? Because was anyone else taking any action?
So I'm kind of conscious we're being recorded here. My director wrote to Equality and Diversity to say, look, this was back in November or December, to say, this is happening, and what should we do? And the response was, oh, well, that sounds like an IT thing, so ISD should lead it. And so that's kind of how it's sort of worked out. And, I'm the sort of person that if I know that something needs doing and nobody else is done, I can't help myself. Yeah. So I'm a victim of my own kind of conscience here, in thinking, well, it's not going to happen if I don't lead it, so I'm leading it.
I think
and actually, I don't mind, in fact. I mean, I'm actually really enjoying it, but it's totally not what I had in my plan for this year.
UCL's blessed to have you, I think.
I know.
In many ways, of course.
UCL is also blessed to have Michelle Farmer, who is our sort of assistive technology lead, and she's been running our special enabling IT suite, which we're about to rebrand. For many years, and she's an absolute expert and authority, and a very wise person. So, I mean, she's been massively helpful. Without her, I think I would have run a mile.
Yeah. We do have a bit of time for questions. I can see hands already going.
Actually, it's not so much a question, but did anyone go to the Kent's accessibility conference?
Yes, I went for that.
Because do you see Richard Morton's?
Yeah.
Because he did clear up the monitoring and enforcement bits of it.
Yes. So I think the quote, in fact, I thought I had it in my slides, but I don't. When we asked the GDS about monitoring enforcement, first of all, the monitoring body is the GDS. The enforcement body is the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and the two of them are seeking to take something like a proportionate, corrective, and supportive approach. The last thing they want is for us to be closing down sites, stopping doing lecture recordings, because we're panicked about the amount of work it takes. And what you have to remember is that anything is more accessible than a sheet of paper. So let's not ditch the digital because it's difficult to make it accessible. Let's just try and be sort of pragmatic in our response. But yeah, and so the sampling is only 2,055 sites across the public sector and universities. So actually the chance of being caught out is really small, but I'm not really sharing that information when I'm telling departments, because I don't want them to get complacent. Because actually, I think this is an opportunity to make everything better, to make all of our teaching and learning and our information better for everyone.
Well, one thing it did say that they were planning to test many sites with automated tests, which he said would be in the thousands.
Oh right, okay. Well, I didn't grasp
Yes,
that bit.
yeah, so yeah, it was the detailed test in hundreds.
Yeah.
But and I guess this would only be the publicly available sites,
Yeah.
because obviously they can't
Yes.
look at every of these. But
Yeah.
I think actually this might take more to get into it, but actually running automated tests. So a lot of sites, and yeah, it's exactly what you said though. It's not like you then have an enforcement notice. It would then you'd be informed that there's a problem here. You do something about it.
Any other questions or points of information?
If you fail to meet the requirements, what are the potential sanctions?
Well, that's the problem. It doesn't have kind of teeth in the way that the GDPR does. So, you know, your Vice Chancellor isn't going to go to prison, and there won't be hefty fines. It's really unclear what the sanctions are. I think they're just going to kind of tell you need to take action and expect you to do that.
It's more that people could then bring an action against you under the Disability
Yes,
Act.
yeah.
So,
I guess there is always the risk that lawyers will try to kind of.
well, also as has been discussed on the GIST group, it's basically discussed with students. things like that.
There is also an issue that the Office of Students are also one of their key drivers this year into the future is actually looking at the student experience of students with accessibility, as there's been an increase in the number of students enrolling. So if they think that those students are going to be overburdened, they may decide to implement some sort of penalty.
Okay, well, but I wouldn't resist that, you know.
Yeah. Anything else? Askill?
Yeah, I've got a question about transcripts. So in my previous job, I had to make my case for anything that's audio or visual that's got speaking involved, that we should have transcripts available for the students. I've not seen much regarding that.
I think the reason might be that the deadline for that is a year later, and so it's only going to be pre-recorded rich media after September 2020 that needs to have captions or transcripts. So in terms of the immediate areas for panic and action, we're not quite there. One of the things that I'm hoping is that the ability for speech recognition, speech to text is going to get better. Now, because you were at the Kent conference, there were some absolute howlers from the platform they were using to do speech. At first I was thinking, this is fantastic. And then a different speaker comes up with a different accent and it's, oh my goodness. Microsoft have got some very strong capability with that. And there was a guy from Microsoft speaking at Kent and I asked him about it afterwards. And he said that what they've got is if you use PowerPoint and you've got notes in your PowerPoint and you've got word text in your slides with technical terminology, with specialist terminology, which Microsoft never heard before, it's intelligent enough to hear the word and link it to the written word and then get it right. So that's really, really great. It's just it's not quite there yet, hasn't been released yet. And we use Echo 360 for lecture capture, and they've got a speech recognition thing, which again gives you some howlers. And the trouble is that they're not sufficiently reliable that you can just turn it on across the site, because really then the academics are going to have to go back through and watch the whole lot and make sure that there aren't things in there which are completely wrong and are going to mislead students. But I think the reason that it's not getting as much discussion is just because the timescales for responding to that are a bit further down the line. But I'm kind of optimistic, and I know that Echo, for instance, are working really hard on this, but so are Microsoft. I'm just hoping that it's going to be something that we can just buy into and roll out.
Yeah. We were given some guidance to use the free facility called speech notes, but I tried it, and the trouble is it puts in no punctuation and no capital letters. So it's incredibly work intensive.
So then they edit it.
I recorded something that took an hour, and after 3 hours of trying to edit my
I gave a,
Yeah.
it's not something I could ask our
Yeah.
tutors to do.
No.
So actually, it's really
Yeah.
important that we
Yeah.
get some guidance.
Yeah.
And some institutions are only able to think about free software, and that's all they're
Yeah, no, I
suggesting.
get that.
So, it's really nice to know that there are purchasable things, but I think there's this gap
Yeah.
at the moment.
I mean, I suppose, what anyone could do is, when you're preparing a lecture, put in the notes field your script. But it's time consuming, and if you tend to,
We're also encouraged to try and be spontaneous.
yes, but, I suppose that, there's the way that you actually present it in the room, which will have the jokes and the off-the-cuff remarks and going slightly out of tangent. But as long as the core information is there in the notes later on, I would have thought that would be a pretty good approach. It does take time.
Thank you, Fiona, so much. I
welcome.
hope that you haven't terrified people and that a lot of what
A little
Fiona
bit of
was
terror, though.
maybe, but what Fiona was saying, hopefully you knew a lot about this already, and if not, then it's been incredibly valuable. So thank you very much.
I'm very sorry I can't stay up at the dash.
And it's just as well because there's no more chairs left.
That's true, yeah.
There's a slightly dodgy one here, but I don't think we'll fit on that. Thank you so much.
All right.
I will make sure I'll try my very hardest by the end of today to get the Fiona slides to you, which I've already got, that worked well, Danielle's as well, and the recording, so you can forward that on to other people. I think what Fiona, she's left the room now, but I think what she said was really, really important. I almost feel like I want to send that to the IT director, certainly the ones that I work for. So I'm going to hand over now to Danielle, who's here from King's Online, part of King's College, who's going to tell you what she's actually doing. So we've had kind of the doom and gloom a bit from Fiona, which is like, oh my God. But Danielle's going to hopefully raise your spirits and say stuff that she is already doing. So I'll get your slide up. There you go. Thank you.
Hi, so yes, as Sarah mentioned, I work for King's Online, which is a team at King's College that does online learning, online courses. And as a result, we produce huge amounts of online content every day. And we want to take responsibility of making that content compliant, even with the knowledge that there needs to be some of these sort of bigger institutional efforts that Fiona spoke about. So I am a visual designer at King's Online, but I do a few different sort of more technologist side pieces. So I do a lot of our front-end development, and I co-lead on accessibility. So I thought I would start with just looking at what our team has already done, and specifically what we had done before the regulations fell on our desk. In regards to our online content. The first thing is that we made an early decision to invest in human transcription of all of our media. And that's been huge for us because we cost that into our production cycle, and we're not now having to sort of scramble and find the money somewhere to transcribe media. But I like talking about transcripts when it comes to accessibility, and especially in a UX context, because I think it's a great example of how if you can design something with accessibility in mind, it actually improves the experience for able students too. So a lot of our students are working professionals, they're on the go, they really struggle to watch videos depending on what setting they're in. So being able to put captions on or download a transcript has been really vital to them. The other thing we did was we did the JISC audit. So JISC has a service to do this, and we had an opportunity to send one piece of our e-learning in to be audited. And the thing we were really concerned about was something that we call an iLesson, which is basically a chunk of e-learning that the student works through. And the reason we're concerned about that is that we use an open source authoring tool called Adapt to create that. And that means that we contribute to building that open source software, and we can contribute to maintaining it. And so we were really concerned that we wanted to know that that software was generating iLessons that were accessible. And the results we got were generally positive. So all the reports we had of issues were quite easily solved, and we solved those quickly, and we sort of were very reassured by that. So then, we got those back, we felt really great about it, and we then just sort of stopped doing anything. We just assumed that we were performing really well. And aside from maybe like a couple of people who were interested in accessibility, it just sort of fell off the agenda until these regulations came back in. And suddenly, for me, that was a really positive thing, because it meant I could take something to my team and say, this is not just like a passion project for me anymore, it's something we need to do and we need to comply with and we need to take seriously. So what are we doing now? Well, as I say, we only sent one iLesson to JISC for the audit, and that meant that while we got this great positive feedback, and while JISC did a really good job, they had a really small sample, and it meant that they missed a lot of the realities of what our content actually is and of our production process. And so we realized we needed to address some of the details in the tech. So we got this feedback and we'd assumed, okay, our authoring tool that we are creating, the CMS is doing a great job, but there were some details that just couldn't have seen. So one of them was formula. So for our finance courses, we have a lot of mathematical formula. We had assumed that that was working fine with assistive technology. Our web developer had sort of read documentation that said it was working fine and sort of plugged it in. And it wasn't until months later that I was just like trying one of our iLessons with a screen reader that I realized that formula were not being passed by a screen reader. So that's meant that the ongoing things we've had to do are sort of small on-the-go testing of little elements like this to make sure that each of these little components are working. And then just improving some of our UI elements, so making sure that there are good standards in place for color contrast and things like that for UI elements. We also needed to address, as I say, a much larger sample of our work. The audit that we did with JISC was just too small. So we did a big internal audit where a couple of us basically went through a much larger sample of our content and tested it with assistive technology and made big checklists of things we needed to change or things that we needed to do better. But ultimately, from that audit, what we found is that there really weren't that many problems with the technology. Our big problem was practice. So the technology was set up really well to create accessible resources, but we just weren't generating it because we were not doing the best practice. So we started running a few accessible practice workshops. So this was internally in the King's Online team. So we have quite a big team for an online learning team of instructional designers, visual designers, project managers, QAs. So all of those individual teams got some accessible practice workshops just to sort of raise awareness and upskill them. But I also was just really overwhelmed by the fact that we had so many sort of things in position to help people do like practice accessibility well and design in accessible ways that they weren't doing. And our big thing, probably 90% of the problems that came out of the audit was not having sort of text alternatives for images. It was huge. And I sort of said, I don't know why this is the case, because our tools have space for you to add alt text. The sort of templates that we use for storyboarding content have space for you to add alt text, and it just wasn't happening. So I did some interviewing of different people on our team, quite informally, to try and figure out what it was that was sort of making them trip up with this practice. And it turned out that they were just forgetting, or because we moved at such a pace, they were leaving it to come back to, and they were forgetting to come back to it. And ultimately, because of all of our designers and QAs looking at a preview version, they're all cited. It's sort of an invisible problem when you're looking at a preview rather than on the authoring side of the CMS. You just don't know that it's missing. So I developed this plugin to go into our CMS. And basically what it does is it goes through the preview version and checks all the images. If those images don't have alt text, it puts a great red border around them. So that means that our instructional designers, when they're checking resources before they go up in the VLE, they are alerted to that, our QAs are alerted to that. Rather than it being like a punishment, it's a prompt to get people to remember to go back and add that in. So I think, yeah, it turned out that the accessibility side, in connection with UX, we thought we were really thinking about the user experience of disabled students as the key accessibility issue, still very much true, but we also had this other UX issue, which was for our content producers and how to create a user experience that would prompt them to better practice. So what do we still need to do? This is very much my opinion. So we've done those checklists. We need to go back and correct all the bad practice that we've had in the past. There isn't really, as Fiona was saying, there's some gray areas in terms of what the responsibility is in digital compliance. But we sort of said, let's embrace this as a chance to really take on the responsibility that we should have been doing the whole time and make sure that our resources are as accessible as we can make them. So that's a big task. The other thing is sort of just creating the stakeholder investment in this. So King's at the moment does not have a strong institutional movement to resolve this as an institution. And what we're saying is small teams sort of trying to do their bit. But I think we do need to get more institutional investment in this. I think within teams, we still need some more investment. On my team in particular, despite all of these audits and all of the insights that came out, accessibility is still seen as a technology issue. And like my big dream is to have universal design for learning, that we're starting from a point of trying to get everyone access to learning and have design learning that's great for every student. And so I think that takes a lot of mindset shift and a lot of investment in people earlier on in the process. So both on our teams and the back teams that we work with, to really get on board with seeing accessibility not just as a technical issue and not something that needs to be solved later with technology, but something that we should be designing into all of our learning.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Danielle. Any questions? Anything anyone wants to ask? Obviously, Danielle's work is related to the BLE, but the BLE is a website, so it was a very relevant presentation. Okay.
What tools have you used for your internal audit?
So I used, I'm a Mac user, so I used VoiceOver and worked through with that as a screen reader for everything, which gives a very good basic impression. And we did some, keyboard navigation. There's a few Chrome plugins that we use to check color contrast. So yeah, there are a lot of tools out there, and in our case, it just happens to be sort of what I preferred using.
Can I make a comment on that?
Absolutely.
I'm a screen reader user. I use VoiceOver at home, and I use JAWS at work. And my experience is that VoiceOver can access easier more difficult websites. With JAWS, I'm checking the same website with both the reader. JAWS can struggle if the website is not properly done accessibility in mind. With VoiceOver, it gets better with it. So this is my experience, and I would think that quite a few people using VoiceOver, but quite a lot of blind people use JAWS as well for different reasons. So I think it has to be taken into account that JAWS may not be as good as VoiceOver when we're testing.
That's really good feedback, thank you. Yeah, and that is something that I forgot to mention, is that I think where our team is really sort of falling short at the moment is that we are just sort of testing internally and trying things out. And what I would love to do, especially because our team has a new specific team within it devoted to UX, is to actually start talking to people who are using assistive technology, observing how they're using it, and yeah, actually really listening to the user and what they need. And I think that's really where we're falling short in a big way right now.
Lucy's got
I just had a comment about your example about alternative text for screen readers. We do look at content in our content management system. We're using Drupal, and with one of the things you could do, of course, if you don't train yourself, you've got to import the alternative text languages. If they forget, is we make that a compulsory requirement to fill that in. So in a way, you get through that hurdle, and they can't upload an image unless, or save it, or upload it to the media library unless they put the alt text in.
But
So you can ask your developer.
the importance of that is that you only put alt text
Yes.
in where it's relevant, though, because if it's a decorative image, you shouldn't have alt text.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, yes.
So, yeah.
I do think that's really useful, and I know that so Moodle, the BLE, does demand that. The tool that we're using does not. And one of the battles we've basically had is because we have so many stages of production. So our content comes first from a module lead, a lecturer, that goes through an instructional designer who restructures it, designs it for online, they turn it into a storyboard. That storyboard then goes to a visual designer or a content developer who has no understanding of the content at all, and they just build that out from the storyboard. So they're the ones who are getting the roadblock, but they cannot write the alt text. They don't understand the content. They're often under really tight time pressures, so they need a way to prompt an instructional designer to say, "Can you write this?" Or prompt an instructional designer to go back to a faculty member and get them to write it. So that was, yeah, we definitely explored putting sort of a block there, and decided we had to be a bit more flexible because of our production cycle.
Right, did you have a question? No? Yes.
I just wondered if you had any comments about differentiating between the tool and the delivering the content that you're developing and the content itself from the accessibility for students. Because we have to take into consideration both. Are you and how are you doing it? If you are?
Yeah, I think delivery is something that, those things that Fiona was saying that sort of keep you up at night. Oh, what is this? It's something that I'm really concerned about. Our team has made a distinction in that we are sort of involved in designing and developing, and faculty themselves are involved in delivering. I think that, has its issues in a lot of ways. Basically, I think, we need to get for Kings, we have sort of faculty-based TEL teams, we need to get them on board. But yeah, there are loads of concerns about delivery that I think of. So for instance, I think a lot of King's faculty are really interested in doing audio feedback. And that is something that I'm constantly thinking, how will audio feedback be accessible? And where does our responsibility fall as an online design team is helping people deliver that effectively.
Just a really quick query about the alt text decorative images. If you have a document that's predominantly decorative images, do you have to put a statement that you are not using alt text because of that, or do you just not use it for those images?
I think Alice, sorry,
Yeah, no, it's
Alice
fine.
Pastor McNaught suggested that you just don't post anything on there, so it just misses it.
Okay.
The reader would then reset and just go to the relevant
I
bit.
think it does need to blank alt text.
Yeah.
Tag it, though. It needs to blank one with nothing in, because then it
Then it
knows.
thinks it's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though I have seen sort of mixed research, again, goes back to like really needing to work with the users and not doing that. So I've seen some research that suggests that, for instance, partially sighted people, they can see that there's an image there, and then they're not being told what it is, and you sort of have to trust that the developer is intentionally not adding the alt text. So that is another issue too.
Yeah,
So
and
that-
the advice is that if you don't need an image for content purposes, to avoid using it really, not to use it for decoration. I know it's very tempting, I'm a designer, so I do tend to use images, but the advice is not to use it. Also, depending on the software as well, sometimes I've read in PowerPoint as well, if you're gonna miss the description, it's better to put inverted commas, but I think that is something that you need to check with the screen readers, as this lady was saying as well, and how they work.
One of the things with Office is that if you're using Office 365, there's a tick box for decorative, but if you're using other versions, there isn't. And I've seen some advice saying, right, for decorative. And that's what we've been trying to go with in Office. If it's the odd thing, obviously not loads and loads of them, but it will be much easier when we move to Office 365, which we are going to in September, because then we just tick the box and hopefully that.
So what people just Carol, do you want to take yours and then you've got Nelly and Lucy?
Just, is there some guidance on how you describe, what kind of description? So for example, yeah, graph, how would you describe that?
Graphs I find really difficult. They're particularly difficult. I think, well, it was really interesting because I was talking to a physics PhD student about this and how difficult it is to describe graphs. And he was saying, well, when I write a paper to be published, I actually am, the best practice is to have a paragraph before explaining what the graph shows and how it works. And so it would be great if we could get our content writers to do that, if we could get our faculty members to start doing that, instead of trying to think of how to squeeze it into an alt tag. But there is some guidance out there about sort of how to write good alt text and like have the right tone and what's important. The most basic, I guess, essential things that you don't need to put image of. But yeah, basically it's trying to reflect the tone, and I will send Sarah some links to those things.
Just add on with this, because I've been doing some work with this. I work on a lot of maths, stats and economics courses, and what we have found in general is we have to go back to the academic because they know what the graph is showing. And if you're not such an expert, then you could give a lot of useless information. Often it's there to show one thing specifically, whether that's the direction of the line, slant, if the curve is moving. It has to be the person who understands it, and they can write something quite succinct to show it.
Does your recommendation include poets?
That's two.
Yeah, the songs, the poet things.
Yeah, it's really good.
Send me the link and I'll send it on, sorry. Lucy?
Oh, so just as I comment quickly about alternative text and decorative images, you should be able to, the screen readers should read it as a null, so that it doesn't have an alternative. So if it's set up properly and it's software can read that, so then you can get around that.
And then if you're looking for accessible formulas, etc., at the last Future Teacher webinar, they presented 3 different sources you could go to get it some formulas. That's already been dealt with, so you can actually go in and get it from there.
So that was the one
Future
before.
Teacher, yeah.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
two things on that, yeah, put them in. Naomi?
Yeah, just thinking about how you are planning to do testing with people who use assistive technology. Because that's something I've tried to do, and it's been really difficult finding people. And I sort of offer incentives to students. We give them vouchers if they take part in usability testing. But it's still really hard to find anyone who's using assistive technology because there aren't that many students at Berkeley in a particular year who'll be using JAWS, for example. Just wondered if anyone else had any ideas about how you find people.
Yeah, that's something that we haven't started doing yet. And the UX testing and interviews that we're doing right now are with our students and the staff that we have is that there actually aren't that many accessibility needs that are registered amongst our online students. But yeah, I think that's a huge challenge. I've spoken to people who've worked on government websites, things like that, who say that it's quite tricky to recruit users with assistive technology. Yeah.
So I've ended up doing, I have ended up doing lots of testing with people with dyslexia. So I feel like I've been able to cover that, but only about twice managed to do a test with a JAWS user, which isn't great. So yeah, I'm not the only one having that problem.
Can I suggest you can to simulate the experience of a person, you can switch off your screen and run JAWS and try to see what you can read and what you can do. And then obviously when you switch on back your screen, you can understand what you've missed.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. I mean, that's a good thing to do. I just think it's always a bit better to find someone who is really using JAWS real, if we can.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other,
Just to say that, I mean, we work with an agency, and just for people's interest, they charge £625 plus VAT to do a full page. What we did is we gave them formats of pages with everything going on in them, tables, accordions, and everything like that. So it could be a case of trying to find, your pages which got everything, pages which got everything on and pages. They then, I mean, it's great what they do because they basically go out to a whole team of different people who try different technologies and come back with all sorts of things. You just
Who's it used?
we use DIG inclusion, DIG, DIG.
Tim, sorry, I missed you out.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just two things really. I suppose one, it would be really good that it has guidance for academics or people who are providing content online for sort of live events, because I think a lot of our academics are really keen to do these sorts of things. And like if they're getting feedback about a certain issue with the topic, they'd say, okay, I'll run a webinar and I'll invite people to come along. But then some of them don't necessarily know that many of the things like Blackboard Collaborate, for example, you can have somebody captioning it as the webinar's going on, or giving people advice that if they have particular accessibility requirements, then these things will be recorded and transcribed and that sort of thing. But I think it's just the acknowledgement of the work that needs to happen around any of these sorts of spontaneous pieces of content being delivered by academics. The other thing I was just going to mention that kind of came to my mind when we were talking earlier about how can we maybe think about pooling resources as far as testing is concerned. I know that in a previous role I was doing test management and quality assurance, and at the time there was a sort of very early budding group that I hadn't contacted in a while, the cross-university testing. I'm trying to remember what they were referring to themselves at the time. They were calling themselves QT, but I'm trying to remember exactly what that stood for. But it was about universities engaging sort of about sorts of testing they're doing, and there was quite a few discussions going on about accessibility. So I just wonder whether or not it's either worth maybe reaching out to them again, or even or within ourselves, just saying maybe King's is a really strong group of people that can advise on this sort of thing. Maybe another university might do a bit more resource to another type of accessibility testing. So
yeah, that's a really excellent idea. It's something maybe we can feed back to this group. That's cool.
Yeah, I've got a question about alt text itself. So in my previous role, we had a lot of graphs that we described. Obviously, alt text has a certain character limit, so we actually are really able to get around with that. However, it became very descriptive. And I wanted to ask you is, do you think it's better if we've got, say, like a graph, but then underneath it we'll have text that describes graph? Or is that a bad use of accessibility?
So I've done that for some really detailed graphs that's just not going to work for alt text, and we need to include a lot of detail. It's like have an accordion underneath that says this is it's the text description. Sometimes data tables, although tables aren't great, but if you really need people to have all of the data points, providing a data table alternative is another option. Yeah, I think with graphs it's really tough. It's sort of case by case.
Sometimes you kind of don't want to tell people what the key point is of the graph is the teaching point. You might want them to work it out. So how do you deal with that? That's also a tricky one.
Are there any other? Yeah, Diana. About the graphs, I have a BSc mathematics, so I studied math, and there are obviously a lot of graphs. I think the best way is to go to the lecturer and ask him to do the description. there is no way to describe a graph if you don't have the background. To give the correct information without revealing what the student wants to learn. And so I think that's the best way.
What about tactile diagrams? Do you have much experience of those?
I do, yeah. Tactile diagrams are great, but they're very expensive to be produced. And if you don't know, sometimes there are so many details on a diagram that they are not necessary for the learning. It's just for other reasons.
Yeah.
And a tactile diagram becomes so complicated that there is no way you can understand what you're touching.
So you have to kind of simplify it
You
first.
have to simplify, but then in order to simplify, you need to know what needs to be there.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's an expert thing that only the person who's, the material has. Yeah.
That's why I suggest going back to the lecture is the best thing. If it's a single image, it's easy, like a picture of something. Obviously, anybody can do it. Although I had a colleague who wrote an article in a newsletter and she included an image, and I said, can you put a description? She said, I don't know how to do it. And I said, what is it? She said, a child on a wheelchair smiling. So that's it. But when it comes to complex science, then
I suppose that's with the alt text, just imagine that you're describing it to somebody who can't see it. That's the, face to face, how would you describe it?
Thank you so much, Danielle, for lightening our mood a bit and saying actual activity that you've been working on. We've been joined virtually by Marcus, who's at Nottingham Trent University. So I was thinking, I don't know if he can hear me, or if Marcus, you wanted to share anything that you're currently working on.
Hello.
Oh, hello. He's from the speakers. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Marcus, and tell us what you're up to?
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Hi everyone. My name's Marcus, obviously, and I work as a digital practice advisor at NTU. We've got, it's fair to say, some issues trying to get people engaged with accessibility here. That notwithstanding how our university is organised. Now, I understand, you guys come together from lots of different institutions, and this is the sort of thing you're trying to sort out yourselves. We've kind of got that within an institution, just to kind of make things slightly more complex. So that's the first kind of barrier that we're facing. So what we found is there are pockets of activities going on around the university, and sort of very keen people trying to push things and trying to push the agenda. However, it's not getting a huge amount of uptake either from academic staff as a whole. As I said, there are pockets, and it's not getting a huge kind of interest from senior leadership as well, which is obviously quite problematic. I personally, I've sort of been trying to do the whole bringing everybody together piece. So something like you've got here today, where you're bringing everyone from around the organisation together, and been reasonably successful with that, just to try and get people talking about it and understanding what the regulations are and how that's going to affect their practice. And also a little bit to try and panic people into realising the importance of this as well. I don't know if that's something that you guys have been trying to do.
I'm trying to allow Marcus to see us in the room, but I'm not doing a very good job. You're just going to keep seeing me. Does that work at all?
No, I can see the PowerPoint slides.
Okay, all right. So there's been a lot of nodding, Marcus, particularly around the issue of, and Fiona talked about this morning, about governance and support from above. So I don't know if anyone has anything they would like to add to this discussion about what you're currently doing. Let's stick with the positive for now if we can.
Yeah.
Is anyone like to? Yeah, go carry on, Marcus.
Hello. So what I have been doing is over the last couple of years, we've introduced a range of courses and embedded. So my main role is around digital practice for learning and teaching, but I also do some support for professional services as well. And what we've found, what we've tried to do is we've put on some very discrete accessibility courses, so based around effective use of things like Word, effective use of of our BLE, which is B2L Brightspace. PowerPoint is another big one, and they've been reasonably successful. We haven't necessarily had we haven't run a huge number of them, but when we do run them, they have been very popular. But the main kind of way we've been getting in and getting the discussions going is actually working individually with schools and going and talking to sort of the leadership teams within the schools, and then trying to work out which aspects of accessibility are most important to them and they think would have the most effect for their school, and then trying to do something bespoke. So I've been going in and doing sort of sessions with curriculum teams, and that's been reasonably successful. What we've also done is completely revamped all of our development sessions and resources. Well, the resources are work in progress, but all our sessions to actually have accessibility embedded within them. So previously we would have a session, so creating long documents or something along those sort of lines, which used to be about kind of, you know, tables of contents and things like that, but we've basically tried to squeeze accessibility in as a kind of a sort of under the radar. So we're not necessarily talking about it overtly, we will mention it, but it's about how can what we do, what our practice, how can that support all our students or all our users, and it's quite a subtle shift, I think, from what was done previously, but it's found it to be quite effective. And then when you start to sort of go into the kind of questioning phase of sessions, you then get people asking about, oh well, actually, you know, they sort of realise on their own that, oh well, if I use heading styles, I mean, this is the basic one, if I use heading styles in Word, actually I can make tables of contents really easily, which is the kind of the thing that we try to push them towards, but also it allows all our students, all our users to navigate around a document much more easily. It allows them to basically manage the document and use it to be more accessible. So it's aiming for, as I think Danielle mentioned about the dream, we're aiming towards that universal design idea, and you know, and it's just trying to take little small steps to try and get people there. So rather than kind of a big shouty, you know, guilt trip, we're trying to just kind of gently, just under the radar, squeeze it in. That way we don't kind of get too many people's backs up, but also it's just that kind of subtle shift in behaviour is what we're kind of after.
It's a really nice approach, just to kind of take your time and work with individual groups of people. Is anyone else doing anything right now? Is anyone's institution doing something that you want to share? It worries me that no hands are going up. Elena, you've got a hand, go for it.
Because you know, so. Yes, so I work at the RBC with cool. I'm a learning technologist now. I used to be a senior learning content developer before, so I'm used to the field of accessibility. The first thing I did when they told me that I was supposed to lead within my department was to do a to-do list, so that the institution knew what we needed to do, because the learning technologists, I don't think, should have the responsibility of doing this. And I passed my document to my manager and the senior managers, and they seem now to have taken it seriously, so they passed it on to, I presume, the principal and other people that will be able to make decisions on this. Behind the scenes, I have been creating a Word and PowerPoint template. Within them, I have put the accessibility guidelines, more or less, for people to be able to do it by themselves. And we're going to be promoting this in July. Also, something very important, I don't know if you know that both Word and mostly all Microsoft software have accessibility checkers within themselves. So it is quite useful. Not many people, or not everybody knows, but just to pass your documents to the accessibility checker at the end, and it tells you where you need to improve things. So this we will be promoting in July. From then onwards, we're gonna have open workshops where people can just drop in and ask us about their document, and we will be helping them working through some of them. What I have just done now is an audit of one of our courses, and I have done it following the government 41 points. I mean, it has been a disaster. I don't know how we are going to get through this, because if, in order to comply with the regulations, we have to pass the 41 points, or to say that they are not relevant, it will be very difficult, because we have not only the courses within Moodle, there are a lot of PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, PDFs. I don't know how we're going to get through it, not this year, but even the following year. So we are working on this, but it's just one of our tasks, and it's not the main task as well, which I don't think is very useful, because it will take a long time.
Thank you. I was just thinking something you said, maybe remember that those of you who don't work in e-learning and don't do anything with VLEs, I wonder if you're aware of the Blackboard Ally tool, because it was only recently that I realised that Blackboard Ally doesn't just work for the VLE, it works on websites as well. Anyone got Blackboard Ally, Shoshi, that might like to say something?
We have Blackboard Ally on our VLE, and I work in quite a small team, and in fact, one thing that is convenient for us in terms of accessibility, we are the only people who've upload content, we don't. Academics, sort of similar to Danielle's situation, academics pass their content to us, but we actually kind of put that up online so we can do our checking then. But we're finding it really helpful on one thing. So Blackboard does three things, it's kind of got three possible ways of being used. Part of it's for students, so it will automatically put in place certain accessibility features for students, like the ability to download in different formats. If there's a PDF, students can download it as an audio file, as a failed file. This is kind of something which is built into a student-facing tool. There's a instructor-facing tool, which is about uploading documents, so you can do really easy accessibility checks. So it's got a traffic light system telling you if, again, we're looking large. In my situation, we're looking large files have been uploaded, we have so many of them, and it will kind of tell you what the issues are and what's lovely. It's been developed in the last 2 months. They've built more and more of this, is that if you say there's a PDF that's flagged as red, if you click on it, it will then tell you why it's flagged and give you instructions as to how to fix it. So it will say things like, this is red because images aren't tagged. Click here to find that, so don't have alt text. Click here to learn how to put alt text into an image. This has been flagged because the language hasn't been recognised and because the hierarchy is wrong, or it's got more than 7 heading layers. Click here to find out what these things mean and how to fix them. So that's, I think, a really valuable tool. There's also an institution level thing which gives you an overall report, which I would say is a little bit shaky. Anyone who's worked with Moodle reports before will know that they are odd, and they're which odd. But it's still got these 3 different services, and it looks really promising.
So anyone not using the VLE and is in charge of websites, what are your plans right now? What are you doing? Let's go positive. James.
I think our experience has been driven largely by some of the things that have already been said. So the University of London, it's been really hard to get it on people's radar that this is actually really important. I had a few comments from ICT that this isn't really an ICT thing, and that it's a digital comms thing, and perhaps you should be leading on this, which is really frustrating because it's not just us, it kind of covers all the different areas across university, finance, HR, all the different areas. In terms of the website, we use Site Improve, which I think is going to help us to identify possibly some of the quick wins and immediate issues that we might have with our website. So we're going to continue to use that in the short term. I know that University of London does have Blackboard Ally, but I didn't know that it was could be used on the website as well, rather than just the VLE. So I need to investigate that. It's just something I'm trying to get a little bit of traction on, to bring different people together to put this on the radar, and actually it's more than just the website, or more than just the VLE. So we've got head of inclusion, who's going to be involved in that, so as well. We're just trying to get trying to get it on people's radar.
It's getting the right people around the table.
Yeah, and it's proving a bit difficult, and actually just getting it to be flagged at senior leadership meetings as well, which is kind of frustrating that it doesn't seem to be picked up anyway.
And that's the same thing that over the few months I've been looking into this is happening everywhere. Yeah.
One of the things that we're trying at LSE, and Mike from LSE, is working very closely with finance, legal and procurement to basically, if anyone is going to a third party for contract, which we typically do quite a lot of, to make sure that we've got mandation for this within new contracts so that what we're supplied with is, it should automatically be compliant. Ultimately, we're still responsible, but we do want to have the burden of creation where possible shared with other people as well to make sure that we're all working together. Because that seems, if you know LSE, an organisation that's very, very federated and people do a lot of their own kind of approaches, like many places, because they're a centralised function that a lot of people have to engage with. It's a good way of tracking some of this stuff at source.
Thank you. Elizabeth, 3 things. We use like site Morse report. It actually has the accessibility and you can check it out to see, and that will do the website. And there is, apart from Ally, there is also census access.
Yes.
Which we provide as a service for our students with inaccessibility issues, so they can choose to upload their documents and indicate whether they want it as an MP4 player or what have you. So that's also available. And I think the third thing is to remember that along with procurement, etc., and third-party services, certainly speaking as somebody who works in the library, all of the e-books that we purchase, which are not accessible now, are going to be something that we have to try and shoehorn the providers to do something about, or make a really difficult choice of saying, actually, no, we will not purchase this. That can become very difficult when that's the only version of that book available by that provider, and there is no other provider we can go to get that ebook. So that's going to be really interesting, all of those ebooks that we have with just PDF images rather than actually OCR documents. Never mind the subscriptions to other databases, which I'm going to be starting to look at again. But yeah, it's going to be fun.
Just a question on that, actually, because obviously, like, we have our students at Central University have access to the online library, which is, millions and millions of pieces. And I think in the past there have been certain restrictions put on buying pieces from them because either the copyright rules mean that students overseas can't access and that sort of thing. So there are already certain restrictions we put on academics when they're trying to include this stuff in the curriculum. But I wonder whether that's going to become a more, as far as accessibility is concerned, more something we need to be considering more and more. And yeah, I mean, I suppose that leads on to another question, which is that does this take into account external content that we're linking our students to? Because lots of our content does say, go and check out this website, or go and watch this video, or
We
go
had
and...
it in the Future Teacher session, talking about OERs, and we were talking about the accessibility aspect of it, where you are, if you're aware that you're sending them to a website where it isn't accessible, your responsibility to at least attempt to address that. But that's going to take time to do, that you can't do it in one go. Where you do have a strong responsibility, where you're paying for that content. And I'm sure we're going to have to talk to the London University Purchasing Consortium about bringing up accessibility as being really top of the list as opposed to being further down. Because we're currently locked into 3 preferred suppliers. Now this is coming, it's very everything up in the air and all that, so yeah, it's going to be quite difficult.
Something that was really inspirational at the Kent thing, because University of Kent and Kent Council all work together, and they've worked on this procurement thing, and they've not really changed now in terms of suppliers when they're responding, acting on this. And I think that is one of the next things which will come out of this, because I don't think we use seats, but we're looking at bringing in seats, which is used by a lot of universities. the very button you press to log in is not compliant. It's not fast. And we would have had within our thing, this is, we want it to be accessible and to this thing, but obviously they've not done anything about it, people haven't been pressure around it. So what is nice about all of this is I think this will help change the wider industry.
Marcus has got his virtual hand up, so do you want to take the mic again, Marcus?
Hi, sorry, that was really interesting. So just going back to a couple of points ago, where someone was talking about how do they get buy-in. In my back pocket, I have my nuclear option, which is to go through RSU, and basically explain to them what the rights of the students are and how the university won't be meeting those rights. But I'm keeping that as my my trump card just in case I need it if I can't get any traction elsewhere. I don't know if that's something that any of you guys have considered. And the second point I wanted to make, I'm not sure if this has come up, but I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we have a moral obligation, and I've started planning towards this, but we have a moral obligation to support our students to create accessible documents, not just in case they work in the public sector, but just in general. And it's something that we could do. One of the jobs of the university is to help make a better society, and I think by our students leaving with these skills is something that is incredibly important. I don't know if any of you have started to think about that as well, and if there's anything in particular you're doing with it.
Some really interesting links, I guess, into careers and employability. Anyone else thought of this?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a workshop with the students as well in the induction period in October.
So that's the Royal Veterinary College.
Yeah.
To get your students thinking about it.
It's also an element of well-being, that ability to navigate very quickly to what we want, reducing cognitive stress levels and things like that. So some of the things I think that have been produced for staff, teaching staff to work with their documents, could actually quite easily be repurposed for students.
Students and their digital skills.
Because it's not just students who have disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some staff who may not have announced that they have issues, but that would help also.
And at Kent, they're rolling accessibility into their courses for students, so that the ones who are doing courses in science, so that they're prepared for the workplace. There's an employability thing here, isn't there? That students know about digital accessibility, and it's helpful to them going into the workplace to be able to say, yes, I know how to meet the WCAG guidelines.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This kind of takes us on, we're already having the discussion now, but what Naomi and I thought would be useful to get the last sort of say 10 minutes before we think about wrapping up this morning is, what do you now need to know, and if you need to do some sort of further research. Obviously I will send the PowerPoint slides round to the group so you can see all those amazing links that Fiona just embedded. You can do some research. What do you need to do? We've talked about, James talked about bringing together and being involved in grouping the right people and talking. We're running out of time in terms of that 23rd of September deadline. Does anyone want to share? We'll keep it calm. Obviously, this is a safe space, so I don't want to panic anyone. But what do you need to get on and do?
One of the things we need to certainly look at is whether we have to, going forward, the exam papers that we get, make sure they're accessible. Also, our institutional repository, remind about AAMS or final versions of articles. We've got to look at all of those things, which we're not going to get done in good time. We're looking at it sort of sense of archives, but going forward, new entries, additions to it, we're going to have to make sure those at least meet those requirements as well.
The going forward is now. Yeah. It's 23rd of September 2020, where it's everything from the past. Yeah. I won't be here.
Very good time. Yes, she did.
I'm Rance, it's my first time meeting in UCL. This is giving me a lot of food for thought. I mean, I only was invited to come to this a couple of days ago. Caroline's one of them I'd like to do business from the web team. But because I think Fiona's working with it, got clarifications and all those and timescales are.
Yeah.
Because we are, in the web team, we're aware of this 23rd of September deadline, but we're sort of praying that existing sites means the
.ucl.ac.uk domain, we've got like hundreds of separate sites, and we're just hoping that existing sites means all these sites should have our domain, so it's one thing for clarification on. And it's how we approach our suppliers as well, because we do have some website suppliers who create sites for us, so they're not UCL brands. It's just just things like that really.
Your thing about the hundreds of websites, I know that was an issue at the University of London, I think also with James's predecessor, you had hundreds and they rationalised them. So we now only have 150? Only
I think it's 180.
100, only 180. But that's been, it's a lot less than it was. So that was
down and goes up.
but that was a strategy, and I know that you've now got some stronger rules in place, which is anyone who wants to have a website have to go through you. Is that right? Kind of?
Well, yeah, that's the plan.
I think for us timely, when Jane Van was still there, we last year we really revitalised and reduced our web footprint, certainly our website, the library website. So it went from something like 1,700 pages to 55 pages.
Wow.
And all now in plain English. Thank you, Angela, and the rest of the team for helping with that. And I now know where everything is, and I'm the only person who puts things up. So
actually, for your own accessibility, it's been an improvement.
Yes, it has, definitely. So
But that's a potential new problem, Elizabeth, because does that count as a revision, and therefore is
I know, exactly. Yes, I've been looking at that as well. All the documents attached to that as well.
I think the thing I've fixed on is the accessibility statement, which again, one is a good one, and also finally last month GTS released their template, and actually that was more involved than I expected it to be. But within that, by the fact of things, you think about what isn't working, what you need to work on, and what the requirements is. That in some ways focuses the mains, but also I'm hoping by the fact that various other bits of the business are going to have to do this as well and publish it, will then realise, oh, hang on a second, this is quite big and these are the things we need to do. And it does like a code of saying these are the things you're going to work on, but to do that you've got to do that audit. So that accessibility statement is the way I'm going to kind of start pushing this through.
I think it's very much like the GDPR, where every department had to look at what data they were holding, etc., and then submit that up. Let us hope that that's the approach that's taken place as well.
What Fiona said this morning, one of the things that she said, which worried me a bit, was that there needs to be an accessibility statement for all platforms, and I thought it was only the one.
No, I mean, that in some way, from my point of view, might be difficult because I'm only in charge of actually the things.
Exactly.
So therefore, my statement doesn't have to cover everything else.
I was on the webinar with just webinar yesterday, and some institutions looking at statements per course on Moodle,
Oh my God,
or whatever platform they're using. So I was like, oh my God, we're struggling with the idea of the whole of our BLE, and they're talking about individual ones of courses.
Angela, without putting you on the spot, and you're not sitting down, you have to come in and stand at the back. You asked me a really interesting question a week or two ago about finding out from other web developers what kind of strategy. Would you like to ask your questions at the group?
Well, the question was about the access audit element. We had you were interested to know if any of the University of London colleges are using a particular provider for to do an access audit on top of the sort of the automatic audits that you can just do online.
So we talked about the GISC one.
Yeah, I had a very limited GISC one done
we
as
did,
well.
and UCL's done that as well. Although now that they're a man down and it's not there anymore, I'm not sure what their service is going to continue. Is anyone else using an external? I think
we're doing it slightly lower level now, but we're working with something called the inclusion to test various hours, and then we've got consultancy to go back. This is one of the things which just getting that accessibility statement where I realised it's a bit more serious than what we've done, but yeah, that's
DIG,
DIG, Basically, all these companies seem to be in Wales. And we approached 3 and 2 just never really got back to us properly, but they're really good. And they came and actually did a 1-day training session with us with content editors in the morning and carried on with developers in the afternoon to sort of talk through stuff which was really useful.
I've got another quick query. How do people get the resources and budget to do? So our team is absolutely tiny. Recently we did coming to the end of a migration project from an old CMS to a new one, which has taken up most of our resources, and it's generated a lot of work and lots of backlog lists of improvements. How does one sort of even try to get the resources to even?
This question kind of strikes me as the issue with senior managers and from the very top not coming on board, because when GDPR came in, we all had to suddenly do these e-learning modules and we all had to know about it, and presumably the funding for that came from on high. But yeah, I don't know. Anyone else got an actual answer?
Does anyone else have that problem? Small team.
I think everybody. I think we're all there.
Our red team's just doubled from 1 to 2.
Wow. Because obviously we need to put in place things on the website to enhance accessibility.
Yeah. How can you do this? Lucy?
Do you have a lot of PDFs on your website? You do?
Yes.
Well, I mean, one thing you could do is to ensure that all your staff, you create those PDFs in different departments. They're all aware how best practice of creating PDFs to make sure they're accessible. That might be a good starting point. So everything you put up should pass, then you won't have to do any extra work on that.
We try, but there's a problem, I suppose everyone's got the same problem when you've got like a devolved setup in content creation. A lot of it is done out in the field, so to speak. So on another matter, we've had 2 GDPR incidents where people who have got, they've got access to update their websites have uploaded sensitive information. We only found out, someone else raised it with us and we had to go through an information security thing. So it's so difficult to manage. That's how we're trying to
prioritise. Yes. GDPR, you're going to get fined. Yeah. I kind of hope that some students out there do sue their universities, because this will help us to demonstrate it.
That's also quite a good point. So the conversations I've had internally with some senior people said, oh, well, it's just something we should be doing rather than something we have to do. So they said, oh, I'd like GDPR where there's a fine attached. This is just a reputation thing. I'm like, well, it's a bit more than that, and actually the reputation thing is just as important. So I think that's something that if they do bring out finding mechanism around it, that would actually help the case for all of this.
And now that our students all pay, and yours pay a lot at the University of London, but they're all fee paying, let's hope that they do look into it. Naomi?
Yeah, I think following on from that, when we're all worrying about how the hell we're going to do all the things we need to do, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we probably, I think, all agree with what we have to do, and that actually it's a good thing. I know it's easy to lose sight of that when you are faced with.
That's a really good point, because I ran a workshop a month ago, and it was basically focused on the VLE and learning technologies. Was saying, oh, maybe we could how can we get out of it? How do we? But the point is, we should be doing this, as you say. So it's the correct thing to do. We have 10 minutes left of this morning's session. Can I just thank Marcus? Please stay, Marcus, at the very bitter end if you like, but we really appreciate you joining us and giving us a view from the Midlands. It's been really useful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So for 5 minutes, for those of you that are on Twitter, and I think that's quite a lot of you because we're talking to our kind of right people, I'd like you to send a tweet, if you're willing to do that, based on one action that you will do from today. We've talked a lot about that. You're welcome to steal somebody else's idea if that would be useful, but for literally 5 minutes, have a think. And if you don't use Twitter, then just think internally, what is it that I need to do as a result of today? We won't be following up and chasing up and making sure you do it, but it'll be a nice collection if you can do that by Twitter. Daniel.
I just wanted to add about Blackboard allies. I'm Daniel from ROA. As well as being able to detect how accessible a document is, it gives you alternative download options. So you can download the original file, or it can convert it to audio, EPUB, or eBraille. And I was a bit skeptical, but it's actually pretty good at it. And especially if you have a scanned page from textbook, which I assumed it wouldn't be able to recognise, so sort of like it picks up all the text, all the characters, and converts it to different formats.
Okay, so I'm not an advocate for Ally there.
Right, so just to jump in on that, one thing which I also quite like about the Ally as well is it helps people understand the importance of formatting PDFs. Because when you do the conversion to MP3, you'll get things like paragraph break, paragraph break, paragraph break, and then it'll be the title. And after explaining to people that it's important to actually format properly, making them listen to just a few minutes of this.
So that's similar to the effect you get from screen reading.
Yeah.
The way to see how screen readers work. Rather than how to read.
It would really be great to have some simple training about how to prepare documents for screen readers, actually, for those of us who are working with external tutors and people who are always writing stuff for us, to be able to share with them. So if anybody's got a resource like that, they could
Yeah, if anyone has
to,
something like that.
just a quick guide to how to produce documents really well, so they can be used by the screen reader.
I'd imagine
And the
there's
shorter the better, so that we can.
I imagine Jessica's got some stuff on that already.
We've got a Creating Accessible Documents course that we've put together, which is a couple of hours course, but it doesn't just cover screen readers, it's all the aspects of making Word and PowerPoint mainly.
And is that
we
open
touch
to
on
the
Excel.
people or just internal?
I'm happy to share the resources. We've got a sort of like almost like a sort of checklist with a few. It's like a quick guide really that tells you very quickly how to do things, not in depth, but it's mainly for saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, rather than too much detail. But it's for screen readers. I guess the main focus is probably people who might be using screen readers or have some kind of visual impairment or like an issue with colours, and people with things like dyslexia and so on.
That would be great, especially for people like me that aren't here from an IT perspective and how to share this sort of thing with other academics who are writing. Yeah,
I was also thinking that Caroline and I put together a checklist based on the recommendations that came out of Policy Connect, but specifically for the VLE, which was a workshop that we ran last month, 2 months ago, actually it was in May. Wow, it was towards the end of May. So we looked at the recommendations for Policy Connect, and then as a group we came up with the things that we actually need to do. So that might be useful. I can share that around as well. But that's specifically for VLE rather than all websites.
A lot of the principles probably apply there, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Plug for Backpack for All.
Yeah, go for it.
Which is still out there and everybody can use Backpack for All as
And
well.
if you've got LinkedIn Learning, they've got a Creating Accessible Documents course as well, LinkedIn Learning. And there's something for WordPress and other things, I can't remember. There's a bit of accessibility stuff. Plain English as well.
Yes.
Mustn't forget about plain English.
So Birkbeck will be definitely linked on the email that I send, hopefully at the end of today. But if there's anything else that you want to share with the group, a lot of you are already on the mailing list, so feel free just to email us, not to just come from us. If there's something you want to share, please go ahead. As I said at the beginning, if you want to join the user experience group, we don't just do focus on accessibility, we look at all applications of involving users, best practice in user testing, around the whole range of activities that we're all involved in. So if you would like to join that group, just let me know. You've all got my email address, or Naomi's as well. So then that takes us on to the user experience group, which I'll be stepping back from in a few months, but then I'll be back again after a year. Are there any burning topics that you would like the group to look at? As I said, we meet once a term, but we have got the mailing list. So if you're experiencing something that you're struggling with in terms of UX, we're a nice group to support each other on that. I think when you booked onto today, there was the option to give us some ideas, but if there's anything, this is where we got the accessibility idea from the last meeting. So is there anything right now that you can think of? I think we're probably all a bit exhausted from the morning. Okay, so then don't worry for now, but come back to me individually if you would really like a focus on a meeting. Can I thank you all very much for coming, particularly Fiona, who departed some time ago, and Danielle and Marcus for sharing experiences. I will get that email out to you hopefully by the end of today, if not definitely tomorrow. Anything else to add? All done? Okay.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.